All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're looking at how digital tokens are actually solving one of humanity's absolute oldest coordination problems. It's this really fascinating mix of economics, history, and tech, and we're pulling from some incredibly insightful source material to figure out how we can literally program human cooperation.
So, it's a super relatable problem, right? How do you actually get everyone to pull their weight? Think about a carpool, or maybe a community garden. How do you make sure people chip in instead of just, catching a free ride? If you've ever organized a group project, you know exactly what I mean. It always starts with the best intentions, but eventually someone stops driving or stops pulling weeds, and the whole thing just kind of falls apart.
Which brings us to part 1, the tragedy of the commons.
To fix this, we've got to understand the root of the problem. Economists have studied this for decades, and it's basically the invisible force that just wrecks our shared spaces. The tragedy of the commons happens when the whole community benefits from something, a nice park, clean air, a reliable carpool, but the responsibility to maintain it is totally diffused. Our sources point out that without a direct, tangible reward for keeping it up, people naturally exploit the resource. They take without giving back. Not necessarily because they're bad people, but simply because the system totally encourages it.
Moving on to part 2, the evolution of broken money.
Before we get to the modern fix, we have to look at how our traditional money systems actually make this selfish, short-term behavior so much worse. Because the way we value our time is directly tied to the money in our pockets. The source material talks about a core concept here: time preference. They argue that unsound money, like government fiat experiencing crazy high inflation, drives a high time preference. When your cash loses value every single day, you want to spend it instantly, right? Why save if it's worth less tomorrow? But sound money, which has a limited supply, creates a low time preference. That naturally encourages long-term saving and, most importantly, long-term cooperation.
And hey, this isn't just some abstract academic theory. There's this unbelievable story in the material about Wences Casares in 1984 Argentina. During massive hyperinflation, his mom picked him up from school carrying 2 grocery bags completely overflowing with cash. That was her salary, 2 bags of money. They literally sprinted through the grocery store aisles grabbing food while a clerk was right there actively slapping new, higher prices on items just to keep up with the crashing peso. Holding cash literally meant losing it by the minute. It's a powerful reminder of how broken financial incentives force people into pure, short-term survival mode, which completely destroys any chance for communal planning.
So let's look at part 3, tokens as the solution. How do we fix the neglected garden and the broken money? Well, the sources point to a massive technological breakthrough: digital tokens. Now, the key here is that these tokens aren't just speculative casino chips. They're actually highly functional tools. The token economy framework explains that tokens can be designed to perfectly harmonize personal incentives with communal benefits. Instead of just hoping for goodwill or threatening punishment, you just program the token to automatically reward the exact behavior the community needs to survive.
Let's think about how this builds a working ecosystem using our community garden analogy. Imagine setting up a simple utility token system for it. Step 1, you spend an hour weeding. Step 2, a smart contract automatically issues you a digital token for your verifiable work. Step 3, when it's time to harvest, you can only claim your share of the tomatoes by spending the tokens you actually earned.
It's a night and day difference. In a regular garden without tokens, the tragedy of the commons completely takes over. Everyone expects someone else to do the heavy lifting, but everybody wants the fresh veggies. But add tokens into the mix? By giving people a tangible, programmable reward for their sweat equity, the tragedy of the commons is bypassed entirely. The garden is maintained, the usage is fair, and the rewards are sustainable. You've essentially just engineered fairness.
Which leads into part 4, real-world token coordination.
Let's scale this up from a neighborhood garden to the global economy, because these same programmable incentives are happening right now on a massive scale. The Check Your Financial Privilege material outlines how a global token, like Bitcoin, functions for most of the planet. Here in the West, we might just see it as an investment, but a staggering 89% of the world is born into weak currencies. For folks in places like Cuba dealing with severe devaluation, or human rights activists cut off from banks by authoritarian regimes, this tokenized coordination is a literal lifeline. It's a decentralized, peer-to-peer monetary lifeboat that just can't be arbitrarily debased or censored. And the reason it actually works as a lifeboat comes down to one specific number: 21 million. That's the mathematically capped supply. It's a hard truth against the arbitrary nature of inflation. The authors note that this cap creates a predictable, deflationary environment. Think back to our time preference chat earlier. By removing the constant threat of inflation, users are finally incentivized to save for the long haul instead of just endlessly consuming today. On a macro level, it solves the tragedy of the commons by actually rewarding long-term holding.
But we also have to talk about Part 5, guardrails and investor protection.
Because, let's be real, any new financial frontier has extreme risks. It's not all perfectly manicured community gardens. There's a darker side to human nature when new money enters the chat. History proves that whenever an exciting tech drops, bad actors and wild speculation follow immediately. The delusions of crowds material explains how rapid innovation triggers massive groupthink. People stop looking at a token's actual utility, like does it actually help the carpool, and they just buy it based on the greater idiot theory, right? Hoping to offload it onto someone else for a higher price before the whole bubble pops.
And honestly, this behavior is absolutely nothing new. Think about 17th century tulip mania, where people traded generational wealth for literal flower bulbs, or the 1929 stock market crash, or the 2008 banking crisis. The sudden rush of inexperienced investors into shiny new financial products always attracts scammers and creates mass hysteria. And right now, the crypto space is definitely living through its own version of the Wild West.
To manage all that chaos, we desperately need clear classifications. There is a huge difference between types of tokens. The sources point out that a simple utility token, like for our theoretical carpool, is really just about accessing a specific app. But security tokens, those represent traditional financial assets. When tokens start acting like stocks or bonds, they absolutely need strict oversight to keep the market fair.
So regulators have to step in and set up some serious guardrails. The material is super clear on this. Everyday investors need protection from the inevitable bad actors. Market manipulators absolutely love using pump-and-dump schemes to artificially inflate prices, and Ponzi operators are always hunting for inexperienced buyers. By enforcing data privacy, demanding real transparency, and requiring ethical engineering, regulators can make sure this tech actually lives up to its promise of fair coordination, rather than just becoming a high-tech tool for theft.
Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating thought to wrap up this explainer. As the sources showed us, from that neglected garden to the crazy hyperinflation of the 80s, misaligned incentives have literally always been our biggest hurdle. But now we finally have the tech to transparently and immutably reward human cooperation. So the ultimate question is, are we wise enough to regulate it safely, protect everyday people, and finally put an end to the tragedy of the commons? It's a question that's going to define the entire next era of our global economy.